Good evening, everyone. We would like to welcome you to the first TECA Chattanooga event of the new school year, C3 Chattanooga Community Conversation on Race in Education. My name is Erin Glenn, and as a founding board member of the Tennessee Educators of Color Alliance, we are very excited to have you join the conversation with us as we dive deep into some issues that are surrounding our local area. So before we get into the panel, I do want to provide a little context into what provided the framework for our conversation today. So as we all know, COVID-19 has had an alarming impact on the nation as a whole. Specifically, if we think about how Corona has impacted communities of color, the South has been devastated the most. There are statistics that show in Tennessee, African Americans make up 17% of the population, but 25% of the cases of those who have been infected with COVID-19 and approximately 36% of those who had passed away because of the virus. We also know for people of color, Latinx makes up 5% of the population, and then 26% of the cases of those who have been infected with COVID-19 and 9% of the deaths. So we do know that this is one issue that we have been facing as a nation since March, and it's still something that is very paramount in our upcoming school year and our thoughts about how we will reopen school. If we couple that with the recent events that have impacted social injustice across the nation, we know that there have been very many issues in local news surrounding educators, not educators of color, but people of color as a whole, as we consider some events that were sparked by the death of George Floyd and protests around the nation. So when we think about these two different issues that are going on and that have been paramount this summer, we also think about how that will impact educators of color as we return to school. And then what impact these events would have on students of color as we prepare for the start of the school year. So if we couple it down locally and think about Hamilton County schools, we are so excited that this past school year we experienced historical growth. In 2019, we were rated a level 5 in all tested subcategories. But as we disaggregate that data and really dive into the gains that were made by students of color, we see that they were outperformed by their counterparts across every grade level, across every subject and content area. So that really lets us know that we have a population of students and a population of educators that are very much impacted by what's happening around them, and that does truly impact their achievement as they start the school year. So for those reasons, we really want to bring a panel of stakeholders together and consider what supports can be made to really elevate conversations that are going to consider this subpopulation of the student body across Hamilton County schools, and also the educators of color that will be the teachers and educators for this group of students. So tonight we are proud to welcome an esteemed panel of people across the Chattanooga area that really have some insight and are going to help dive into this conversation as we consider what type of supports would best target this population of students and educators. So I am proud to now turn it over to Executive Director of Tennessee Educators of Color Alliance, Dr. Dyrese George, and local educator, Dr. LaRonda Jennings, who is the Exceptional Ed lead teacher for Hamilton County Schools.
Thank you, Erin, so much, and we appreciate the introduction. Hello to everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight. Erin Glenn is actually leading efforts in Chattanooga with a team of local educators to create a TECA Chattanooga chapter. We started these work last fall, and then kind of things got stunted a little bit due to coronavirus in the springtime. And so this is our efforts to kind of pick up the pieces and begin to flesh this out. A little bit of background context. I started tech when I was a classroom teacher myself. I was in the classroom in 2016. I actually was teaching in Clarksville, where your now superintendent, Dr. Brian Johnson, was the chief academic officer. So he and I know each other very well. But it was birthed out of the need to create space that we will be able to support educators of color so they can stay in the profession, but then also elevate their voices into a leadership capacity where they can influence change in the policy space. And so a lot of the work that we've been trying to do is keep people in the profession, but then elevate their voices. That way we can make some systemic change that affect retention, recruitment, and support for them so that they can remain in the profession. So enough of that about us. We really want to spotlight the evening with our panelists who are joining us. We're so excited to have them hold space and be able to engage in a very timely conversation. I feel not only that is resonating across the country, but specifically in the Chattanooga community. Chattanooga is near and dear to my heart. I actually started college in Chattanooga. I didn't finish there, but met a lot of people and still connected with many people in that community and oftentimes visit. So this conversation, even though I'm not personally there physically living and have these lived experiences in the community anymore, still is near and dear to my heart. With that being said, we'd love to start introducing our panelists. We are fortunate to have Montrell Beasley. He's the Director of Community Engagement for Chattanooga Preparatory School. He's a Chattanooga native. He has been working in youth development for over 16 years, serving in the Hamilton County School System, Boys and Girls Club, and the City of Chattanooga Youth and Family Development Department. He's a strong advocate for families, education, and most importantly, his community. We also have Deanna Carson. She's a 2020 graduate and valedictorian of Central High School. She is a Chattanooga native, and she will attend Harvard University this fall, where she plans to major in psychology and later attend law school. Next, we have Lauren Swanson. She's a teacher at Lakeside Elementary School. She is a Hamilton County educator born and raised in Chattanooga, Tennessee. She's also the owner of Lauren J. Education and the co-founder of Teach Like a Boss in Chattanooga, a program that's geared towards invigorating teachers and helping them to be more successful in the classroom.
All right. Hi, this is Dr. Jennings, and Aaron, I appreciate that introduction. And so happy and excited to be a part of this, co-moderating this panel, and am very honored to just be on the leadership team for TECA Chattanooga. I'm going to introduce Jenny Hill, who is a board member for Hamilton County School Board in District 6. She is a business owner and her children attend public school. She represents District 6 and all of our students with a commitment to make every school in Hamilton County an excellent school. Welcome, Jenny. And lastly, but certainly not least, we have LaQuisha Ewing. She is a strategic consultant for Unlearn Everything and Live. LaQuisha is the owner of Unlearn Everything and Live, and she is a professional business and educational consultant that has more than 18 years in crisis management, program design, organizational strategy, project management, and evaluation, group dynamics, team building, and community coalition building. Welcome, LaQuisha. And I'm going to go ahead and go into our first question for our panelists. This question is going to be directed.
Let's also just establish some quick norms real quick. Sorry, Dr. Jennings.
Okay.
Just to ensure that we are able to follow the conversation with minimal distraction, everyone is muted. We encourage you to engage in the conversation using the chat function. Share your thoughts and your opinions. If you have a specific question, please use the Q&A option function to submit your questions. When you submit your question, please include who you want to answer your question. We will choose a few of these towards the end of the conversation. We have about 12 to 14 minutes towards the end that we'll allocate towards answering these questions from the audience. And most importantly, while we want to create a space where we can be thoughtful, we can engage in dialogue, we can share our opinions, we ask that everyone respect the varying perspectives that are presented here, both verbal and also written. So if you are responding and reacting to the conversation in the chat box, we ask that you just do it with a level of respect. And if you're doing so verbally on the panel, we look to respond in the same manner. With that being said, let's dive in.
Okay, so this first question is going to go to Lauren, Jenny, and LaQuisha. How would you define educational equity? And in the scope of education in Chattanooga, how are we progressing towards this? And what successes and challenges have been experienced? So I think you do have access to those questions on the slide that you can refer back to. And we will start this with Lauren.
Yes. Okay. So first, I'm really excited about this panel. And I just want it to be known that I actually talked to several educators of color in Hamilton County from different learning communities, because I wanted to get their insights and I wanted to include their thoughts and be thoughtful in the answers that I am presenting to you today. So in my opinion though, educational equity means that every student has the support that they need to be successful. And that support is individualized in a way that they can be successful in everything that they do, and that we give them access, and that access leads to opportunities. And when it comes to education in Chattanooga, I think that we're progressing towards this, even if it's a slow progressing. I actually talked to the Chief Officer of Equity, and I wanted to give you guys some things that Hamilton County is actually doing to promote equity, if that's okay. And this is from the Officer of Equity, Dr. Marcia Drake. So there's a book study with teachers in creating culturally responsive classrooms. They've also conducted a book study with principals creating culturally responsible classrooms. The New Teacher Network has a series on cultural conversations. High schools will have a club that creates safe spaces to have critical racial conversations. They have purchased access to racially diverse resources, and they're going to conduct workshops on identifying illicit biases and actively recruiting teachers in HBCUs. So I'm not sure if everyone has heard this, but this came from the Chief Officer of Equity about how we are trying to progress in Chattanooga. I've personally seen challenges with equity, and I think that comes from the classroom level. I think that students need to see themselves in curriculum more. They need to see themselves in literacy. I know that has to do with curriculum. I come from the elementary world, so in the library more, and they need to see educators who look like them as well. So I think those are some of the things that, in my opinion, Chattanooga still has some work to do. But I'm seeing little steps, and the fact that we're having this conversation is a step as well.
Thank you, Lauren, and thank you for presenting those facts, as well as pointing out how we need to give access to those equitable opportunities. We appreciate that. Jenny, would you go ahead and share with us your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm happy to. And thank you all so much for inviting me to participate in this panel. Erin, I feel honored to have been and humbled to be here. I agree completely with Lauren's definition of equity, and would add to it that when we unpack that word success, recognizing that success has many different definitions. And from a school board perspective, you know, we have to look at our TN Ready scores as a big factor, and we know that our students of color, and in particular Black students, are lagging behind our majority white students. But I would add that no child is just a test score, and for me, it's very important that every child is future ready and ready for what's next for them. So to Lauren's point about access, some of the other really strong work that has happened related to equity in Hamilton County schools in the last 3 years includes additional access to AP courses and early post-secondary opportunities. In the 2019-2020 school year, we had 817 Black students participate in AP classes, and we can compare that to 2017-18 when we had only 360 Black students participate in AP classes. Something that's important to note about APs and other early post-secondary is that we know that students who complete successfully one or more of those types of classes are 80% more likely to go on to matriculate through some type of additional degree program. So to me, as a school board member, that's really important, because I want a child to be ready to do what they want to do. I would add that Marcia Drake's Department of Equity has done quite a bit of work in the last 3 years, and well, in the last 2 years since they've been created. But unfortunately, a lot of that work has been done quietly, almost behind the scenes, because it seems to me that in Chattanooga and in Hamilton County in particular, we're not comfortable talking about race yet. And so the work that the Office of Equity has done has benefited students in all the subgroups, and subgroups, you know, is that official educational term for children that are special education, who are homeless, who speak a language other than English, who are of a minority race. But we know that there are disparities between Black children and other learning, and other groups of learners, but we're not yet comfortable to really make race, the actual race, part of the conversation. And that's a place where I see we have tremendous opportunity as a school system.
Thank you, Jenny, and thank you for pointing out how the importance of defining access and success and unpacking those two words, and how we need to be more intentional about bringing those things to the table and discussing equity. LaQuisha, would you go ahead and share your thoughts, please?
Sure. So I also would echo pretty much everything that has been said. I think it's important, though, that we contextualize this understanding of educational equity, understanding that you still care about the outcome, right? So we talk about defining potential and things like that. We still care about the outcome, but the focus is not on the outcome as much as it is on the pathway to get there. Each student has a different path by which they get to potential, by which they get to success. And so this idea of educational equity means that I'm going to allow your path, whatever it is, to be laden with the things that you need to make it to a similar outcome, which is this kind of undefined potential, undefined thriving. We really haven't defined what those things are and what it looks like for kids. So that's still an ambiguous term, in my opinion, that adults still have to figure out for the kids in order to create the proper lanes. But educational equity means that every child is receiving what he or she needs to develop. I believe that in education, that there truly is this triangle of quantity, quality, and equity. And so it's not how many schools we have, it's not how great the schools are, if there's not an equitable distribution and access within those other two things. So you can have 100 schools and you can have 100 great schools, but they're not accessed equally by everyone. And so in education, what you have to understand is you can't ignore one while strengthening the other. So we can't build more effective pedagogical programs and build more structures, but yet not look at the equitable distribution of access and opportunity. So I think it's important for us to realize that every child does need different things. I like to use this analogy a little bit. I said, if there are two people that are standing side by side, and so you have people that have been eating their whole life and a person who hasn't, and you decide that, you know what, you want to go I'm from Memphis, and there used to be a Wonder Bread factory there, and that bread smells so good, right? And the two center pieces are always the softest pieces, right? And so you give one to person A, one to person B, and you find that bread that is going to sustain the hungry person who's been eating, but they're just hungry, will kill the person who hasn't been eating, because that very same thing, equally given, is not what they need. The person who hasn't been eating needs broth and water and juice and things to build up their system to, yes, digest this equally given thing. So I think educational equity works just like that, giving the same book without the additional resources and things that are available. I think Chattanooga has been doing the best that Chattanooga can do. I remember moving here in 2003 and hearing that the schools, the districts merged, is what everybody call it. I don't call it a merger, though. I will go on record saying I don't call it a merger. If LaQuisha Ewing merges with Lauren Swanson and become LaQuisha Ewing, then that's not a merger, that's a takeover, but neither here or there. But the schools merged in the same year that I graduated from high school. So that's not very long ago, right? And so there's still some nuances here that we have to look at when we think about how we draw our school districts, how we build true equity within the school districts. And so that's for people like my friend here, Jenny, and her colleagues on the school board to think about that reconfiguration and what it could look like for our students.
Wow. Thank you so much, LaQuisha, for that and sharing your insights about equitable educational equity. So thank you so much. We're going to move on to question 2.
Yeah, and again, LaQuisha, I appreciate that analogy. I've actually given a similar analogy. I think, you know, a lot of times in education, we get confused with equality and equity, and distributing equally doesn't always mean that it's equitable. So I appreciate you providing not only the narrative behind it, but a very vivid example. Moving into question 2, ultimately, all students benefit from having teachers of color in front of them. The exposure to students allows them to see people with different walks of life, reduces stereotypes, prevents unconscious bias, and it prepares students to succeed in a global, diverse society. However, more specifically, research shows that Black students have better academic outcomes. They're suspended less. They face higher expectations. They have better access to gifted and talented in dual enrollment in AP courses, and they are expected, in most cases, depending on when they've had a Black teacher in their life, are able to access college and persist. So with that being said, this question is directed towards Diana, Lauren, and Montreal. How many Black educators have you had in your educational career or life? And what impact did this experience have on your life? We'll start with Diana.
Okay.
Hello. In my educational career, I've actually only had 2 Black educators, but it will technically be 6 if you counted all the related arts personnel and office personnel that I didn't see every day. But the 6th grade was the first time that I ever had a core class that was taught by a Black educator. And I really enjoyed Michelle Cochran's class for many reasons. She was easy to talk to, she was excellent in her field, which was mathematics, and she went that extra mile to form a good connection with my mom. She saw the potential that I had all those years ago, so she challenged me to pursue more difficult math work and even suggested that I consider attending girls' preparatory school. She went on to become Central High School's assistant principal, so a good portion of the student body was already well acquainted with her, even though she was new to that position. Ms. Cochran continued to support me in high school by informing me of several scholarships throughout the year, and she even helped me buy dorm supplies for my incoming freshman year at Harvard. So her instruction has really, encouraged me, and it was invaluable, and it made all the difference in my middle school and high school experience. And my second Black educator that I had was in 9th grade. It was my biology class, which was led by Gary Fomby. He expected nothing less than the best from his students, and his class was structured in a way that promoted a combination of collaboration and independence. And, years later down the road, when I was feeling uncertain about pursuing a post-secondary education, he pointed out that if I put in the work now, I could, set myself up for a rewarding career that wouldn't require as much extensive work later on in life. And, his words helped me realize that I shouldn't doubt my ability to succeed in a more challenging environment. And it really inspired me to continue putting forth my best efforts and finish off all my high school years very strongly.
Thanks, Diana. We appreciate you sharing your lived experience and perspective. Very much valued and appreciated. Lauren, what are your thoughts here on this question?
I'm just in awe of Diana, but that's, I'll keep going. You're amazing. She's so amazing. So I've talked a little bit about how my experience in education growing up is a little bit different. I started in Hamilton County in elementary, and I actually went to an elementary school that was probably 98% white. And I did not have an educator of color that entire time. So if I want to kind of counter that, I do remember feeling alone in that way. I did not have my first Black educator until I went to middle school. I went to a private school for middle school. And I remember, sort of like Diana, feeling a sense of safety. A sense of safety in that class. I felt as if I needed to step up to the plate and do my best. And I was challenged in that class, and Dayana's just like, yes, because I'm sure that you understand how that feels, having an educator who looks like you in the classroom. It just makes you want to step up to the plate. It makes you feel safe. I remember those educators. I've only had 3 in my career, and I remember those educators pushing me and just letting me know that, you know, I could be the best that I could be. And it was just really beneficial, I think, for my career. And actually, the lack of color that I saw in education is part of the reason why I became a teacher. I knew that there was a need for it, and I was excited to fill that need.
Thanks, Lauren, for sharing. I appreciate the narrative, and to your point too, like that resonates with me perfectly. You know, that was one of my experiences. I had one teacher of color my whole entire time in K-12. My first male educator of color, Black man, was in college, my sophomore year. As a result, you know, my experience teaching was very much like that. I was the only male person of color in my building for the time that I was there, and so I definitely. You know, I think the work that we're doing right now, and to your sentiments and your response, is why it's so much necessary for us to not only be present but vigilant in a way that we're trying to have impact on our most vulnerable population. In many cases, our students that look like us. Montreal, love your thoughts here on this question, sir.
Man, I've seen a vast transition while I was in school. In elementary, I had from K through 5th grade. In elementary, I had 5 teachers of color, and they were all females. By the time I got to middle school, my middle school teachers and my principals was 90% of color, 90% Black. Of that 90%, I would go on a limb and say 95% Black. I went to Austin Park Middle School. I would go on a limb and say 95% of Austin Park Middle School teacher corps was Black. That's including the principals, both principal and assistant principals, Black. Dr. Kelly and Dr. Lott. It was Mr. Lott at the time, and it taught me a lot, and they instilled so much in us. By the time in that middle school, I think I said five. We had 5 Black male teachers in that middle school, so it was a strong middle school. They instilled so much into us, and they vested so much into us. By the time I got to high school, I probably had about maybe 8 teachers of color. That's including that's including a Black male assistant principal and a Black male principal. And it was just, then going on to college, it was like, it just like fell off. I had a total of 3 Black professors. One of them was from Africa. So seeing that transition and being able to adjust, I wasn't really prepared for college, because I had to really make an adjustment to the teaching styles of the white teachers. Many of them really didn't care if we came to class, if we did the work or what. They still was getting paid at the end of the day. But luckily, I went to a middle school, and those teachers still stayed in touch with us and still stay in touch with us today. And I can look back, and they guided us, and they still helped us through college. So the Black male teacher or the Black female teacher, it really impacted my life, because they kept that fire under me. They stayed and made sure that I was doing what I was supposed to be doing. You know, it was never a time where they fell off. Even today in my career now, they still support. So, and I think a lot of times we've gotten away. We had a cohort similar to that when I worked at Woodmore. We had a total of 10 Black male teachers back in 2000, and I want to say 15, right before the Woodmore accident. And we had that school running like clockwork. Not to say that they're not doing it now, but we had so much respect from the parents. The parents listened to us, they talked to us. We knew exactly what was going on, and ultimately the kids could relate to us. When you have a core in a school where you have teachers and principals that the students can relate to, you tend to see a lot less suspensions. You see a lot less behavior problems, and you see a rise in test scores, and you see a rise in the parent participation. So it works. It plays a role, and we're going to have to start figuring out a way that we can get some of our Hispanic brothers and sisters to get involved in education as well. We have it now, but we need more of them, because I'm a firm believer that all of our students need to see people and teachers that look like them, whether it's at the administrative level or the teaching level.
Thanks for your candid response and reflecting your lived experience, Montreal. And I think, again, to be transparent here, that I think the conversation here doesn't steer from the idea that, we don't need white educators in the profession.
Yeah,
we do, but
we need that balance.
But what we are saying is, and I think many people here can possibly resonate with, is that, representation matters. When you're in a community that where almost 50% of the students are students of color and over 30% are Black, and your student and your teaching population doesn't reflect that, we need representation. Representation matters. And then on top of that too, like most people who are people of color in this space, they've grown privy to the ideal of walking in spaces and being the only one there, or one of a small few. Many of our white educated colleagues don't have that experience. And so we need to start leaning in more. And if there are spaces like that just aren't diverse, the reality is that we still have a responsibility for ensuring that students are seen, valued, heard, and nurtured in a way where it prepares them to thrive in a global society. Thank y'all for those responses on question 2. You're going to see a quick pause here on the sharing of the questions on the screen, but we are going to keep the conversation rolling. Dr. Jennings is going to introduce the next question. I'm going to stop sharing the screen very briefly just to correct our live streaming on Facebook. And so we're going to keep the conversation going. I also want to encourage everybody to react in the chat box. Make your reactions known in the chat box, but also if you have a specific question, post that question in the Q&A function, and also post that, also name if there's a specific person that you would like to answer that question. Thank y'all.
Okay, thank you, Dr. George. So the next question is going to be directed towards LaQuisha, Diana, and Jenny. In your opinion, what is the state of education for Black communities and Black students in Chattanooga? And how will the recent national, racial, and social injustices impact this experience? Again, in your opinion, what is the state of education for Black communities and Black students in Chattanooga? And how will the recent national, racial, and social injustices impact this experience? And we're going to start out with Ms. LaQuisha for this question.
So that's not a loaded question at all. So I guess I'll take the first part. The state of education for Black communities and Black students in Chattanooga, I think is similar to the students in general, in that our school system as a whole is grossly underfunded, right? It's grossly unsupported in many ways by a lot of people in our community broadly. When you hear this, when I got here, I heard this conversation that talked about, the public-private kind of debate and what we were willing to invest and where we were willing to invest in. And I always heard the public schools on the latter end of the stick, right? And so I feel that as a whole, public schools aren't getting their just due. Even when they make strides where students are succeeding, it's almost like you're succeeding on like a shoestring budget. So can you imagine what could happen in our schools if we had it? This is what I told someone the other day. When I think about COVID-19, the racial inequities that we're seeing in our educational system is not separate from what we're seeing with the social injustices. The cure for COVID-19 could be sitting in Clifton Hills elementary schools with poor textbooks and no science classes that are really cultivating that skill, that ability. And so it's, the thing about public education, when it was created post-Reconstruction, it was created to give you 3 classes of people: your upper management, your middle management, and your laborers. That is no longer the system that will uphold today's economy, the thing that today's students need to know and need to learn. But we have to understand that we're in a system that was constructed for a purpose, and that we can't use strategies of old to basically innovate, to rest on not creating innovation for today. So I think that our Black communities and our brown communities, the question for me, and I hate to be this person, I have a question for the question because my question is not why are Black students or how are they going to fare, or what is the state of Black students? The question is, why do we have communities where there's still pockets of Black community? How do we have a school system that has schools that are 99% Black? How do we have school, like how is that a thing in 2020? The question is the injustice of the system that is built that creates racialized structures within our public school system. The reality is that students fare well when they're around students that aren't like them, race or otherwise, students who have different living experiences. When we look at schools like a CSAS, I studied public schools coming to Chattanooga, intensely. CSAS had a model. CSAS had a way that they did things, and they, of course, I'm not saying that this school is better than any other school, but when you think about it pedagogically, there was a way that they built that school to intentionally create strategies that brought in students from different walks of life, different neighborhoods, and they said, this is the type of learning that we're going to put forward, and there's not going to be any excuse. Parents, this is your accountability. Students, this is your accountability. Teachers, this is your accountability. And they put things in place like you're not going to come in to, a CSAS on the 24th day. You're not going to come because the teachers had already set their regimen, and you don't get to come to CSAS on the 27th day. But we have Orchard Knob Middle where kids are coming in like a freaking rotating door. What kind of policies and structures y'all see? I get excited about this. I think the system as a whole needs an overhaul for Black, brown, and all kids.
Yes. I agree with that, LaQuisha. And you spoke of something that's very near and dear to my heart. I'm a proud CSAS graduate. I went there from 2nd through 12th grade and graduated in 1999. And so the education that I had of being in such a diverse population was something that I needed. So much so when I chose to go to a HBCU, a historically Black university, from first 6 months of college, it was not the best fit for me. I did not have that diverse environment that I needed, and that I had really, had a foundation on that made me who I am today. And so I do agree with what you're saying about we should not have pockets of schools that are majority minority. So thank you for sharing that perspective. And I think that question is one that needs to be revisited so that we can get to the bottom of why it still happens. So we're going to go to Dayana for to share your perspective on this question.
Yes, I agree with everything you guys said. To me, the current state of education for Black residents doesn't really seem to be prioritized. Predominantly, Black schools tend to be overlooked as they are often viewed as schools with like a bad reputation. And, schools with high percentages of Black students tend to receive much less government funding in comparison to schools with fewer Black students. For example, Harrison Elementary's new building, which will merge with Hillcrest Elementary students, recently finished construction. However, it will not be put into use this year because of construction delays. So grades 3 through 5 will remain in the 81-year-old Harrison building, while grades kindergarten through 2nd grade migrate to the 72-year-old Hillcrest building. And, Harrison holds some of its related arts in portables, including physical education, and there are large potholes scattered throughout the entire driveway. Among a host of outdated utilities and health concerns, such as, I think, asbestos was found in the walls or something one of the years. And, unlike Harrison, East Brainerd, they promptly received a new building in 2015. And I know like the recent tornadoes destroyed that building, but, they were in the building for a few years and, they got to get in their new building. And, Harrison has about 10% more Black students than East Brainerd, according to the National Center of Education Statistics. So I feel like that might also play into how different schools get different amounts of funding. And similarly, my high school, Central High School, our building is actually over 50 years old. And the track, I know maybe a few years ago, you guys heard about how we got a new track. It took over 30 years for us to even convince them to pay for the track and get it finally paved. And, the only reason why one of our pods at our school even got repaired was because a few years ago, our home economics room actually burned down. So they redid the whole entire pod and brought in new lights, new materials and everything like that. And I guess like in response to the second question, I believe that, recent events will make students become way more attentive of how their schools treat Black students. And hopefully it'll encourage these students to be more vocal about what their schools need to change to effectively become anti-racist and teach their students to be anti-racist. And, unlike other schools around the nation, I didn't see any Hamilton County schools publicly express support for Black students when, police brutality in the country reached national headlines. And also, incidents such as public displays of the Confederate flag are not taken very seriously. And they typically don't lead to punishment whenever we find out that a student, posed with them. For example, my high school, someone had posed with a Confederate flag, a Don't Tread on Me flag, among other flags. And, I don't know. I mean, they probably, they got in trouble for it, but I feel like it wasn't as severe as it could have been, because those are like public displays of racism, basically. And it's on campus with other students of color who do not take those things lightly, and they don't take these things to heart. But, I feel like, school officials, they might make a few empty promises about listening to students of color more and implementing more relevant curriculums. But I feel like ultimately the school system will operate the way it has been, even though there have been strong signs of outcry from students and parents alike about how schools are being treated and funded and how Black people in America are being treated right now.
Wow. Thank you so much, Dayan. I think you are the perfect example to show how important a student voice is, by sharing your perspective and experiences that you have went through and, quite honestly, persevered through, because you're on your way to Harvard. And so even though you experienced some of those things and, saw these things happening throughout your career, your educational career, you still have that strong voice and that determination, things like this we have to put things like this to an end, and so the inequities to an end. So we appreciate you sharing that and bringing so many factual statements to the conversation. Jenny, would you please share your perspective on this question? Certainly.
I am taking so many notes from all the panelists. I'm learning a lot and have a lot to think about. LaQuisha brought up the fact that our schools merged way back more than 20 years ago. And it was interesting to hear Montreal talk about how many Black educators he had the privilege of learning from. And I think about how that was probably before the systems merged together. But if we dig hard into the realities of progress in Hamilton County, I think we will see that even looking 20 years, so the year 2000 to the year 2020, would we discover that those very same schools that were the best schools in Chattanooga are still the best schools in Chattanooga, and the schools that are the most, that struggle the most are the same 12 schools. And we have not moved our spectrum, our schools on a spectrum of success or achievement in any large way. So as much as we have tried to make incremental progress, and I have seen in my short 2 years on the board that we are making progress, I think really to really deliver the education that our Black and Brown students deserve from Hamilton County, we need to have a whole lot more white people talking about this. And I will be the first to say I have a lot to learn as it relates to racism and systems. But what I have seen in my time on the board is that investments get made without an eye on equity, and certainly not on race, because that's not one of the things we use to measure our progress. If we don't, in our strategic plan for Hamilton County Schools, it's a very strong plan, but we have not been, we've not determined as a board and as a community that our Black and Brown students matter enough to name them in a plan. And for me, codifying a strategic plan and working toward it is the North Star for the board, and takes politics out of a lot of conversations. And, I'm here on this panel as a politician. And I think right now, there is a feeling in a large part of our community that race is a political conversation. So I'm really glad that our board chairman at our last meeting brought to the conversation that yes, he is willing to have a bigger conversation about this and acknowledge the fact that this is not about politics. This is about children and about their futures. I personally think that we have a long way to go. And it's encouraging to hear you all on this panel elevating some of the progress that we've made. But I think it's an uphill battle, and I know that the school board is going to need, and the school system is going to need, continued public support and outcry to make this work happen and stick. Because I can consider, what was it, a year and a half ago that 3 slides were shown out of context in a professional development about that used the word white privilege, and it was in relation to a bigger conversation about bias and about trauma-informed teaching and behavior modification. And there was an explosion that was ridiculous within segments of the public. And I will tell you that a year and a half later, I was getting phone calls about that, still saying that our superintendent should be fired because of those 3 slides. So I hate to be a party pooper, but it's a heavy and high hill that we have to climb, and it's going to require a lot of people continuing to push hard on all of the politicians, and not just the ones on school board, but the ones on county commission. Because remember, our school system is a county system, it's not a city system. And overall, this conversation is one that is new, and I believe that there are a lot of people who, once they begin to think about race and how it affects the outcomes, like if we can have real historical data in front of us as a board and as a community to see just factually, you know, this child has this opportunity and this child has had this opportunity. I mean, to know that there are students that have never had an opportunity to go to an AP class because their school was under-resourced is ridiculous. But when you see that side to side, people can start to see, that's not right. Why isn't that right? And if we can get equity more intentionally codified in our strategic plan in the next year or so, I think that could go a long way.
Thank you, Jenny, for your transparency and your perspective about this. I can speak to, it resonated with me because I was on that committee for Urban Education Institute when those 3 slides and that situation just got, you know, just blown completely out of control. And, you know, the committee, we serve 13 schools in our district that have the most opportunity for growth. And so when we put that together, you know, our intent was to bring something to the forefront that we thought needed to be discussed, and which was cultural competence. Our schools teachers need to be more culturally competent in order to serve effectively serve the students in our schools. And so to have that situation, you know, come up like it did, and, you know, to be just, you know, crushed down. I thank Dr. Johnson for his stance on that. But you're right, we do have a long way to go, and we can't continue to filter things. Like that was the first step, we thought, to be able to put that out in the forefront, and let's start the conversation and let's keep it going so that it could, you know, impact our work. But again, it was, you know, it was just looked over because no one wants to talk, you know, not enough people want to talk about it or feel like their toes are being stepped on. So we appreciate
you all at the system level need to have the board having your back when you are doing work that furthers the strategic plan, which it does. And we on the board need the community in many regards to have our back, so that when we start pushing big or new ideas or new conversations, that if there are naysayers, that enough people speak out and say, wait a second, no, this does matter to me.
Man, that's what I was just going to say, Jenny. I was just going to say exactly what you said. When are we as educators and as administrators and administration level staff want to start telling one another that, no, you're wrong. We do need this. When are we going to, we talk so much about why the police don't address one another. When are we as teachers and educators going to start addressing one another, whether black or white or purple or green or whatever? We have to start telling one another when we're right and when we're wrong, and it starts there.
You're right. Thank you for that, Montreal. And just, I just hate that whole situation got taken completely out of context from just 3 slides being shared to the public with, everyone was at the whole presentation to see the whole context of the situation. But we're going to go ahead and shift gears, and I completely agree with what you all are saying. But we're going to go to the next question for the sake of time. Based on the most recent data from the Tennessee Department of Education, Hamilton County Schools is the home to almost 45,000 students. 48% of them identify as students of color, with 30% being Black and approximately 15% being Latinx. However, only 12% of teachers are people of color. Okay, this question is directed to Lauren and Montreal. What support and resources do Hamilton County Schools need in place to recruit and retain and develop a supportive, diverse workforce? And we'll start with Lauren.
This question, it was a doozy, because all these questions almost mesh together, because it's hard for me to speak about recruiting new educators of color when a lot of the Black educators or the educators of color in Hamilton County don't feel heard now. It's hard for me to go out myself and say, come be an educator at Hamilton County, when a lot of my colleagues don't feel like they have a safe place in their schools. This is an issue. Like Dayana said, I looked for Hamilton County to address the Black Lives Matter movement. I looked, especially when, I've given 6-7 years, blood, sweat, and tears to Hamilton County. And so I feel like Black educators wanted and they needed Hamilton County to say, we see you, we hear you, and we want to do everything that we can, to make this right.
Not enough people want to talk.
And I'm not sure that we got that from Hamilton County. And that alone is a hard pill to swallow. And I think that it's going to take, like we said, it's going to take white administrators to come on as allies to support and to look and to recruit Black educators, to bring them into the room. The only reason I feel comfortable at my school is because my school is led by an amazing Black principal, and she's done her job to make room for Black educators. And we need that to happen, not just at my school, but across the county. That has to happen. It's great that we can have this conversation, but Jenny, I think you said that we need white people to talk to white people. We need them to go back and, like Montreal said, to say right is right and wrong is wrong. And that's creating that safe place. We educators have to have a place that's safe. No one wants to work in a place where they can't be their full selves, their whole selves. And I'm not sure that we have that in Hamilton County enough. We have it in pockets, but when are we going to have it widespread? And I think it's going to take, like I said, white administrators becoming allies. We need training, not just for the school board, but we're going to have to push past that the news reporting, I hate to say it, but we're just going to have to push past it, stop tiptoeing around the issues, because that's the only way that change is going to happen. That's the only way that we're going to gain more educators of color. That's the only way that our students are going to feel safe, is if we just keep pushing past those uncomfortable conversations. It's just hard for me to talk about retaining educators of color when we haven't made the ones that are in Hamilton County feel safe, heard, and wanted. So.
Well, I think it speaks volumes that you're able to just state that and bring that to the forefront and be that voice for our Black educators that are here. I will say that, you know, I feel you on that. I was a classroom teacher for 12 years, and so I have some of the same sentiments. I will say the disparity, and the unfortunate thing is that it's a nationwide issue. We have a great recruiter that goes to a lot of HBCUs and try to recruit, and as well as, you know, other universities as well. But when you go to a room of like 300 educators and only 3 of them are Black or minority, I think the problem is bigger. It's on the recruitment side. The fact that we don't have minorities coming into or wanting to come into education. But I think that goes back to also just not seeing a lot of educators of color when they're in K through 12 schooling.
And we need to be intentional. We have to be intentional about going to get educators of color for Hamilton County. That needs to be a priority, in my opinion. Sorry that I cut you off. I'm passionate about it because we need it I see kids transformed in my classroom, you know, because they've never had a teacher who looks like them. You know, they light up, they're bright now, you know, and so we need that. We need that for our kids. They deserve it.
They do. I agree. Thank you so much. Montreal, would you go ahead and share? I see you smiling and ready to share. We love to hear from you.
I mean, Lori said it best. The only thing that I can add to that is I think the Hamilton County's biggest resource could be the parents. I think parents are our biggest key to recruitment of the teachers, because I say that because if when people from the outside are looking in, they see parents without etiquette, parents that are unruly. I mean, hey, that says to me, I don't want to deal with no crazy parents. But if we have more parents holding themselves accountable for our school system and advocating for our school system, you will see more Black teachers getting into our school system. And our other thing is funding. I mean, we don't pay our teachers good enough. Our teachers are so underpaid and so underappreciated by leadership and by our community. I mean, you're seeing that when our county commission didn't vote for increasing our budget. That was just silly to me. So funding, parents, those are my 2 things that can really help with recruitment with Hamilton County, because I can go right across the state line to Georgia and make $10,000, $10,000 or $15,000 more than I make in Hamilton County.
Okay, thank you for that. It's going back to that intentionality. Lauren, you talked about that safe space, and I just want to say that that's what TECA Chattanooga is wanting to bring to the table. It's just having that safe space for educators of color and allies for educators of color to be able to convene and come up with things that we need to, that we would like to see happen within our school system. So we're going to talk more about that, and would love for you to be a part of that conversation, and you too as well, Montreal. And so we're going to move, I think, to the next question. Dr. George, I think you have that one.
Yeah. I just have to react briefly because after I left the classroom after almost 6 years, I was a director of recruitment for the National Teacher Residency. And my whole job was to recruit people of color to be teachers in Middle Tennessee. More specifically, in Nashville, the student population is 70% students of color. So the cohorts that I recruited, we wanted to reflect 70% people of color to create parity between the teachers and the students that we were recruiting. So unless we were doing something radical, that was the only way we want to move the needle and getting more people into space. I was wildly successful there, but the problem, the reality is this: there are people right now who know everything about education that we're talking about. They know that they're not going to get paid a lot of money. They know the stressors. They know, a lot of people that I recruited were actually paraprofessionals and education assistants who had bachelor's degrees, master's degrees, who were actually already doing the work of a teacher, but getting paid $20,000 to $30,000 less. And so a lot of these people want to do the job. The problem is a lot of times we're preparing people for an opportunity where those spaces that they're going to go into aren't ready for them. We're preparing them to go into a school that's not going to value them, see them, hear them, support them, honor them, and treat them like a whole human. And that is the reality of the situation. And so anytime I know I go in a space that doesn't see me, hear me, value me, I may have enough to stay out a year, give them 5 years. I could probably give them 6 years, but at some point, that reality is going to be a stark mirror in my face, and I'm out the door, especially when I got options on the table. I think pay is essential, but I think honestly, when you're taking people who are already doing the jobs, if you go in some, especially city schools in Nashville, where there are, like, when a teacher leaves in the middle of the year, they just as well promote an education assistant or paraprofessional to teach that classroom than they would have a long-term sub there. Why? Because they know the kids, they know the culture, they know the community. So a lot of people were already doing the work, but just getting vastly underpaid. And so I do think pay is a huge lever that people everybody can stand to make more money, but I do think that, there are folks who are willing to do this job already knowing that that's the reality before they even access the profession. Like, I know what the pay scale is because someone showed me or I've already been exposed to it. But the reality is, even if you pay somebody $20,000, $30,000 more than what they're paying right now, if I put you in a position and you're not being valued, seen, heard, respected, and treated as a whole human, you are gone, period. So give me $30,000, $40,000 more, but if I'm not going to do all those other things and I'm creating an environment and a space that doesn't culturally affirm me, you're gone. So it can't be, it has to be both in. All right, sorry.
Can I add to that, Mr. George? Dr. George, can I add one more thing to that? And I'm going to let you go to the next question. I'm sorry, but it's on my mind, so I got to see it.
Go ahead, brother.
Hamilton County also has to get out of that small box that UTC is the only one that can develop our teachers. We have to get out of that small box. I know we tap a little bit with Lee University and Covenant College, but ultimately our teachers are recruited from UTC, which are not preparing our students of color and are not recruiting our students of color to become teachers. I'm gonna leave that at that.
We'll pivot here. So obviously, if you, I don't know, some of you are joining the call. We're live streaming on Facebook. Some of you've already been on the call. If you've had the opportunity to hear Dayana respond to some of these questions, I think she is the epitome of what of listening and honoring, respecting student voice and what it should be. And hopefully we're creating systems and spaces within the education system that allow us to do that, not only because she's now recently graduated, but she's had that opportunity, and students are having that opportunity over the entire arc of their educational career, P12. But I'm directing the next two questions to you, Dayana, and I'd love for you to speak truth to power here and just give us your lived experience, but also give us your valid and candid advice, being one who was a native and has just recently completed. You have other natives on the call here, but many of these people were in HCS, 15, 20 years ago. And we're trying to see what are the parallels now that what we experienced when we were in the system versus now that now even after you transitioned more recently. So with that being said, building on the previous question, what do you think it would take to influence high school students and young professionals of color to choose education as a career in Hamilton County schools?
Yes. So personally, I feel like it will take a lot to convince students and young professionals to pursue education as a career. Like many of you have mentioned, given the current treatment of teachers and students of color in this school system, many students gravitate towards other career paths because, like you guys said, they already know what they're getting themselves into and they know how they're going to be treated and stuff. And, one prominent issue, like many of you have highlighted, is teacher salary. Many teacher positions, like the schools that they work for, are severely underpaid. And, most teachers end up buying school supplies and classroom materials with their own money because in lower income schools, a lot of students don't pay the school fees that are supposed to go towards those materials. So they go out of their own, way to get everything their class needs. And, also, teachers don't even, get to have much of a say in the policies and school curriculums that affect them. I know there's not really a constant, for me being in this school system, curriculums always change. And I've heard teachers complain that, you know, the curriculum that they had at the beginning of the year is completely different by the end of the year. And like Hamilton County changed it to like better suit the end of course testing. And, you know, they really just need consistency. And really, like you guys said, like about equity and equality, they're not the same. You know, every teacher teaches differently. And, you know, we don't really know what each school, like what students are specifically learning. So if schools aren't learning the exact same thing, how can we all test them the exact same way? You know, we need to actually ask teachers, like, you know, what have they been teaching in the classroom? What do they think is most important for this? Because I mean, standardized testing, it's like, it's a good idea overall, but if everyone's not learning the same way or the same opportunities, it's really not an equal opportunity to measure every student's, you know, levels and achievements in school. And I feel like also, with the reopening of in-person classes, many teachers' health and safety are at risk, along with their families back home. And, you know, private schools, they're obviously going to have enough funds for PPE and sufficient sanitation of their school buildings. But public schools, especially those with a lot of students of color and black students, they're going to be like putting their students in an environment that could be like a petri dish for the coronavirus. And also, you know, Black and brown people are at risk like of contracting coronavirus more so than other groups. So it's like blatantly putting the students of color at risk when like they're in these conditions that aren't really, they don't have the funding to operate normally. So how they gonna have the funding to operate under a pandemic? And yeah, I just feel like, I don't know, I feel like basically like someone had said, you know, we've went through the school system ourselves, so we already know how we're being treated, you know, so you know, if someone didn't like how they were treated in the school system, why would they ever want to work for that school? And, you know, like everyone wants to give back, you know, and they really want to see this country change. But, you know, I guess the best way to change is to actually like admit your wrongs and, you know, actually actively work towards, you know, an end goal. And earlier I mentioned how like I noticed that no Hamilton County schools like mention Black Lives Matter or how Black people are disproportionately being killed by the police, because Harvard actually sent out an email to everyone supporting Black Lives Matter. Like they actually said Black Lives Matter. They didn't like dance around the topic or anything. And, you know, they actually asked us, you know, what can they do to better, you know, be more inclusive in their curriculum and stuff. And, you know, even students like my peers at Harvard who are like in the Black Students Collective, they actually proposed that, you know, the summer reading be based on, you know, racism and anti-racism, because I know like a lot of classics, you know, they're good to read and stuff, but honestly, a lot of people the kids don't really read the summer reading because it's not something that interests them. It's not something that they can like resonate with really. So I feel like that's also like a new front of like looking at things and, you know, being more inclusive and allowing students' voices to also dictate like what they learn, since they're going to be learning it.
I love her. I'm sorry. Okay, I have to say that on record. Deanna, I love you. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Tyrese, if I could jump in just for a moment before you continue with the next question, I just want to piggyback off of Dayana and let you know that Tyner Academy has a Future Ready Institute that is really founded on the principle knowing that we need more educators of color. So we try to recruit in 8th grade so that in 9th grade, they will have a 4-year experience where they get the fundamental education support. They get the curriculum that you would get in an entry-level class, college curriculum course, so that when they graduate from high school, they would have a step ahead to continue on that trajectory of education as a career. So as Dayana mentioned, it is a challenge with recruitment. 8th graders, you know, they see teachers as the teachers in their classroom, and unfortunately, they don't always have the best picture of educators in front of them. So it's something that we are working with UTC closely to try to support not only the pipeline in Hamilton County, but also the pipeline at UTC, but it's a work in progress. We have lots of stakeholders that we are fortunate that work with us. We meet regularly to make sure that we are measuring our goals and what our projected end result is, but it's something that takes time. So it is an effort that we are grateful to work in partnership with UTC in our Future Ready Institute, and we've had great success in our first 2 years. So we're hopeful that we can keep that momentum going in spite of COVID and Corona virtual setting, to make sure that students do get those real world experiences and are well prepared to continue on the trajectory of education as a career path.
Thank you so much. In the interest of time, because we built in some time to have questions towards the end, so we're going to gear up for some questions from the audience. I see people already throwing questions in the Q&A box, which is perfect. Continue to start adding those questions. We're going to ask one more final question. I'm actually going to pivot here. I had a follow-up question for Dayana, but in the interest of time, I want to make sure we absolutely hold time and space to answer some of these questions in the Q&A box. So I'm going to shift to Dr. Jennings so she can ask the last question. And then those of you who have questions, there's 8 in there right now. Continue to add questions and also direct who you would like to answer your questions to. I do see 1 or 2 already, so I think we might be coming back to you, Dayana, for some of these questions that are in the Q&A box. But keep adding the questions in the box. Dr. Jennings, I'm gonna let you take it away.
Okay, thank you, Dr. George. And as you said, this is going to be our final question that we have. And we've talked a little bit about this, but we know that community and family engagement is very imperative to educating our students. And these engagements can encourage action and drive change and influence policy. When you look at many of the leadership structures in local government, the school board, and among key stakeholders, they are often not representative of people of color. LaQuisha, Montreal, and Jenny, this question is for you. Despite that, what did the efforts look like to ensure that voices from communities of color are heard? And what suggestions do you have to improve these efforts? And we know that, LaQuisha, you're been working so hard in our community with your different movements. I'm sure you would discuss that, but just share with us a little bit about your perspective. And we'll start with LaQuisha for this question.
Okay, I'm gonna try to go as fast. I've been trying to take some notes here. This has been amazing. The first thing is, when you talk about driving change and action, we have to understand that you cannot jump from awareness to action. I don't care who you are. You don't get to jump from awareness to action. There are so many steps in solving problems. We have to learn that it's more important to be relational than transactional if we want to see transformation. So again, understanding that racism, I truly believe that racism is so interwoven into the fabric of American culture and our institutions. In order for us to address and dismantle them, the institutions, the systems, it's so drenched with racism that to appear against racism is to appear unpatriotic. That's why Dayana is seeing what she's seeing. To say you want to dismantle these things, it's very sad. That's why you saw the uproar last summer with the slides, because we don't truly understand. We don't truly understand where we're residing in this thing that we call education. And so there are so many things in our formation of what we call the US of A, right? Starting from that Virginia settlement and all of that stuff. Like I've been doing racial equity trainings across our city and everywhere. And I'm hearing how much people don't know about where we sit. Education sits in the commons, right? There's this system of that are called the commons that everybody has access to. And what happens when the commons wasn't so common for you in 1600? I ain't gonna go there. Strategies. The first thing we have to recognize is that we don't need to create more programs and programmatic bandages to fix the kids. The kids aren't broken. Let me, as a mass, the kids aren't broken. Are there kids who have challenges? Yes, of all racialized identity. But for the most part, the kids aren't the problem. If you took healthy kids and you put them into a school with everything that they need in order to be successful, and you create an environment outside of the school where they're not entrenched with trauma, they're not going through all of these ACEs, right? These adverse childhood experiences, then that kid will thrive. I don't care who you are, that kid will thrive. So the kids aren't the problem. Students of color are they're not some type, and I have to say this, they're not some type of weird hybrid population of youth. Students of color can learn, students of color can excel, students of color are bright, brilliant beings. But if you judge a fish by how well it can climb a tree, it will spend its entire life feeling inadequate. In order to fix this, policy, people, and progress. That's the pathway. Policy, people, progress. We can't be relational. We can't be transactional. We have to be relational. And we have to understand that we're in the midst of something that has been broken. It hasn't worked for anyone except for who it worked for, which I don't know who they are. But when it comes to students of color, we have to understand that being Black, brown, Latinx, all of these labels, these things are not a handicap. They're not a disability. They're only a disability when you put me in a system and tie my hands behind my back and tell me I cannot do the things that I need to do because I don't have the resources. So the strategy to fix all of this is, one, IDing that, you know what, we're in a situation that was messed up from the inception. I don't care. If you like fashion, if I button up my shirt wrong, if LaRonda, if you see you like fashion, you will notice if I put on a vest or a jacket, one side of the collar gonna be higher than the other. It's gonna all, and you're gonna notice that, which means until I take all that stuff off, unbutton that shirt and start over again, it's gonna always be wrong. I can dress it up. I can throw a couple of little, hey, No Child Left Behind. If you're going to the inner city, I'm gonna give you $5,000. $5,000 is not gonna fix the fact that in the book adoption, we got jacked. We didn't get what we needed. $5,000 to me is not making this thing equitable. Listen, I don't want to take up all the time. Listen, I am so passionate about our young people and I come from a family of preachers and teachers. My mother taught for 32 years. I've watched people in this school, people that are on this chat, that are in this, give their blood, sweat, and tears for a public who craps on them when they still wake up every day and take the punch. If we are not putting people, policy, there will be no progress. We have to ID, we have to identify it, the policy that needs to be changed, and then challenge it with our voting.
Thank you for that, LaQuisha. Thank you for that. People policy. Montreal, chime in on that, please.
Ooh,
I know.
Wow. Oh, I hate going behind my sister. Man, it was some big shoes to fill. But she said everything I needed to say and hit the nail right on the head. But I do want to add, it said not often representatives of people of color. I would say that is true, but the people of color does not always represent the economic background that the population that they serve, which is one of our biggest problems. And I think to how we improve this is stop recycling the same old Black people to sell these boards. I stepped on somebody's toes, oh well. Stop recycling the same old Black people that you think are in touch with the community and are not in touch, couldn't tell you what's going on in our community, and nobody from our community could even tell you who they were. That is one of our biggest, those are two of our biggest issues. LaQuisha said it all, and I'm just gonna leave that there. I'm gonna let that marinate because that's happening in our community, whether it's in education, business, or whatever. We have to stop recycling the same old Black people.
Thank you for that, Montreal. We're gonna end this question with our school board member, District 6, Ms. Jenny Hill, who has been very transparent with her stance on race and education, and we really appreciate that. Ms. Jenny, can you please chime in on your perspective on this question?
Well, LaQuisha really took it to a place beyond even the simple question. I think to follow Montreal's point, we need to stop recycling the same old white people too.
Oh, Jenny.
Montreal and I are sitting on some boards together that we're the fresh meat. Yeah, and we're doing some things differently now. Okay, so boring answer to the question about like some nuts and bolts stuff about how we're engaging the community just from the school system level. I think we've come a really long way with this in the last couple of years when it comes to getting parent feedback. We have added community engagement specialists to our schools and are really working on getting parents involved and parent feedback on important questions. That said, I think we have a long way to go. And anytime I think often when you communicate, you kind of communicate to the middle, so to speak. You have some some families that never engage and some that engage every time. And so we need to continue to evolve that. You know, if you work a certain shift, you're never going to get to an IEP meeting at 11 o'clock in the morning, you know, or a PTA function at 5:30 in the afternoon. You know, we've got to think creatively about that. And I feel like the folks at Hamilton County Schools are pretty dedicated to that. I could talk and talk and talk and talk about Hamilton County politics, y'all. But I'll stop for now and let us get to some other things.
Thank you, Jenny. I think for this question, I think to LaQuisha's point, policy, people, and progress, a lot of I'm a firm believer that all children issues, the issues that we see from children stem from adult issues. And so that goes back to that policy, people, and progress. So thank you all for your perspective on our last question. We will move to our Q&A from Dr. George.
Yeah. Powerful conversation, man. We could have stayed on that question there for a little bit longer. We could have stayed there for a little bit, but we want to be diligent. We want to honor the folks who are on the call, and we want to get to some of the questions in the chat box. So some of these questions are directed specifically to people, others are not. I'll just kind of throw them in the air and let them land where they may. I'm going to try to get through as many of these as we can, but this one, more of a statement here. This is from April Morris. Appreciative of the conversation. She's been a teacher. She's had been a teacher for Hamilton County Schools for 15 years. The vast majority of teachers in Hamilton County are white females. And considering this, she feels that there should be a required professional development on cultural competency for every school. It is needed. Thank you, April, for that comment. Let's go here. Anonymous attendee, what steps should be taken to build relationships between community organizations and schools to help foster experiences that expose children of color to the same opportunities as other children? Lauren, I'd love for you to chime in there on the ground working with children. We love your valid, your open and honest perspective.
Okay, I'm gonna be honest. Could you reread the question?
Sure.
Sorry, I'm a visual learner, so I need
Absolutely.
this to be equitable for me.
Someone's asking, and they didn't state their name. What steps should be taken to build relationships between community organizations and schools to help foster experiences that expose children of color to the same opportunities as other children? So how are we making opportunities that seem a little more equitable for I would honestly say white children or other children that don't identify as students of color more equitable with community partnership?
You know, I love our community. Just, I know that the Black community, I see LaQuisha, I see Montreal, I see lots of people trying to do things for our students. But I think it just goes back to funding. Like, it goes back to what, LaQuisha said, it's the system. It's not just the school system, it's the entire system. We need to fund the community so that the community can come in to help the schools. And I think that it's really just a trickle down effect. No one can really come in and help our schools if the community doesn't have the money to do so, if that makes sense. I think that they're doing the best that they can to come in and to help as much as they can, but I think that it still just goes down to policies and the system. I don't know. That's all I have on that.
I think there might be an opportunity too, like when you think about the Future Ready Institutes, and there's some external partnerships that exist with a lot of these institutes. I know particularly Aaron has always shared that the Future Ready Institute with Tyner is partnered with UTC and other entities to be able to expose people to collegiate opportunities early on. And so if I'm getting an early snapshot of what teaching may look like before I actually transition towards that profession or pursue that profession, I think that can validate the opportunity for me a little bit. I think icing on the cake though for a Black or brown child is being able to see someone like them doing the job in real life. You know what I'm saying? What's going, the motivation of, wanting to be a lawyer can be amplified if I know a lawyer that reflects my background, if I know an engineer that reflects my background. But I think intentionally having partnerships with some of these organizations and intentionally partnering in a way where the students that we're serving are reflected in the professions could make a lot of sense. Thanks for
I
your.
was going to add on, if that's okay.
Sure,
I was
absolutely.
going to say that it would be great for, that Tyner Future Ready Institute to be in more places than just Tyner. And I think that Jenny talked about how a lot of the things that the Equity Office, they're kept quiet. So I didn't even know about the Tyner Future, Ready Institute, but it would be great to shout that from the rooftops, so that maybe another school that's that's mostly Black, would take that same mission on to foster that relationship with teachers and UTC as well.
Dr. George, can I say one thing?
Yeah.
So I think it's also important for the community, because we're the community. We often talk about the community as if the people that are referencing community is not the community. We are the community too. And so the things that I've seen is Future Ready Institute is amazing, except for when we have a pandemic. And, and we're looking at right now, Bloomberg advisors have been kind of giving us forecasts of where our jobs are and where we're going to lose jobs and where there's going to be a need for jobs. And so I think that there needs to, and I don't know where it lives, y'all, like this is just my, kind of 60,000 foot view, but somewhere in our ecosystem here in Chattanooga, there needs to be an eye that is like our racial equity lens of how the systems are working together, right? And I don't know if that's county government, city government, whatever, but if I can look down and see that it's going to take economically right now, Chattanooga, a minimum of 24 months to bounce back economically from where we are, right? Mm-hmm. Then that means jobs are going away. There's a projection that I'm not going to share right now. I'm embargoed, but there's a projection that makes me sick at the stomach, because when I think about them and I look at the Future Ready Institutes and where they're paired, they are filling the pipeline for the jobs that I see in a report that's going to go away or be furloughed in the next 24 months. So the problem is, like, I don't know who said it. There's a racial equity lens, maybe Jenny. There's a racial equity lens that people aren't, they're not pre-programmed to process decision-making through. And what we're seeing is, again, people are coming up with great ideas, great concepts, but the thing about racism is that it's just racism by any other name is still racism. In education, we call it the achievement gap. It's racism. In health, we call it health disparities. It's racism. Call it what it is. And then we can ID and create synergy amongst our systems to fix and address what we're seeing. I feel that even Future Ready Institutes are preparing, like, where are they? Are they preparing this populace of kids for tomorrow's jobs? And then is this Future Ready Institute preparing a populace of kids for jobs that are not even gonna be here 24 months from now? What is the equity filter that exists? And I don't know, this is a question maybe for us to ponder beyond this, but somebody has to be thinking about that, because those who have been losing, Billie Holiday said, them that got shall have and them that not shall lose. Yeah. And it is not going to change if we don't do that, if we don't figure that out.
Thank you so much, LaQuisha, and very valid points. And I love the perspectives, man. And as we go through, I know we're quote unquote inching towards time, but like, this is our space and we can carve out a couple more minutes. Those of you who, if you have to disconnect right at the 6 o'clock Central, 7 o'clock time, we understand and we appreciate you. I want to go ahead and just say this in advance. Feel free to, someone asked a question about joining the organization. Right now, our membership is free. We're trying to bring as many people into the fold to be connected in. That way, as we begin to start programming, we can connect with people who want to be involved in the work. A lot of our work is centered around racial equity, but a lot of our work is around the elevation, supporting of educators of color and the value that they bring into the space. That doesn't mean that everybody isn't welcome, but if you value that and you're an ally, we need you too as well, because there are a lot of white principals leading schools, and they have a responsibility to ensure that if they have only one person of color on staff, that place is welcoming, secure, warm, hears them, value them, and sees them as a whole human. And so that's just FYI. But let's dive into some more questions for those of you who have a little more time, because we had a flood of them that came in. Here's another question here, and it's specifically to the board. It came from Facebook. How will the school board work to ensure racial equity throughout the county? And I'm gonna lean on Jeannie here if she has any ideas or thoughts
Sure. Well, I think first the board needs to decide that racial equity matters, and that educational equity matters. We need to decide that and codify that as a group, majority of the board. LaQuisha was saying that our systems are drenched in racism, and that to be against racism is seen as unpatriotic. What I see is that a lot of white people, most white people, do not see that our systems are drenched in racism. They do not see that as fact because they do not know anything about it. And Edna Varner asked in the chat about, why do we need more data? We need more learning. So the people, the policy people progress, we've got to have some learning ahead of the policy, or our policies won't be well informed. And I count myself in that learning. I have a whole heck of a lot to learn. But I think to make real progress for equity in Hamilton County schools, we as a school board have to remove the politics of equity, get rid of it, and start talking about students and the fact that every student matters. And it's easy to say every student matters, and it's different to actually make decisions based on that. Our board has been talking about moving one school to another place. Well, in the midst of that, bubbled up conversation, school board members are bringing different ideas of where this particular school could go. And they bring up Lakeside Elementary School, which, to quote some of the community feedback, it wasn't good enough for Black kids, so you want to take us out of it, but now you start talking about putting white kids in it. And the reality is, I don't think anybody on the board thought twice about that. I was one who was like, fine, let's look at Lakeside, let's look at it, whatever. Even though we've had a building study that says this building is too expensive to maintain and nobody should go in. But these are the things that if we don't have a common understanding of our history and the way that our systems work, what they were designed to do, then I think that we are at a disadvantage to move forward with equity work because we don't have a shared understanding of what the heck equity is and why it even matters. Because at the end of the day, it's hard to be an elected official because something that I often see is everybody only cares about their kid. They because in the moment when you're pushing hard against something, it's like, just whatever you do, my kid better not have to use a yellow pencil if I want him to use a green pencil. That's extreme, but everybody cares about their vacation. Everybody cares about, whatever. And so the board has to elevate itself above that to make decisions that aren't just about, well, we've got growth in one part of the county, so we're going to build brand new schools in one part of the county, while not only do we have schools in downtown Chattanooga where the children literally cannot leave their portables when it rains because they're flooded into their buildings. And yet we as a board will get our heads turned on some shiny football field someplace, right? So that's a rant. That was a rant. I'm not as motivational as LaQuisha. I apologize, but I think being a white woman on this panel, I just have a completely different perspective on the fact that white people, on the whole, don't have a problem with the way things work because it works for our kids. That sucks, but it's real. And until we get more white, and it's not because white people are all jerks. A lot of us are, but I can't, I can be kind of jerky. But it's not because we're jerks. It's because we don't know. It's because we've just been getting in our Subarus and going all the places we go. Like, so white people have got to learn about this, and it's going to take, honestly, it's going to take a while for our majority white board to get comfortable with talking about equity and talking about race. You know, I see that I'm on this panel, not my esteemed colleague, Caritza Jones. Caritza's been talking about equity and race the entirety of her service on the board. But because I'm a white woman and I talked about it, people were like, that's really interesting. You know, that's a shame, but that's real. So we need more people to learn about it.
Can I quickly comment? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, you got a comment, and then I think we have time for one more question. I don't want to hold this too long.
No, I just wanted to tell Jenny, thank you for bringing up the Lakeside issue, because I am a teacher at Lakeside, and it took the Black teachers at Lakeside to rally around the community, and that's why we, you know, need more Black educators, because it took us to let the community know that this, in our mind, was not okay. So I just appreciate that that was a topic at the school board meeting.
Well, I'm glad that people stood up and said something, because LaQuisha and I have talked, and I've talked with Dr. Brian Johnson about this. Like, I recognize in my own service, there have been times when I have not spoken up. There is some insanity that happens in Hamilton County around race. And I have not always spoken up. And LaQuisha was kind enough in a conversation to say, Jenny, if you don't feed the ogre, he's going to eat us. And that brings me to tears to think about it. That if the teachers at Lakeside hadn't said, what the heck are y'all doing? I wouldn't have known that we were doing it. You know, like, I need people to call me out. Mm-hmm. And when I talk about the community rallying around things, that doesn't always mean that we're like, yeehaw, this is great news. Sometimes it's, oh, hell no, that's not how it ought to be. Mm-hmm. And keep pushing on that.
Yeah. Thanks, Jenny. We appreciate you. And, you know, you said it, but like, science is compliance, you know, and there's some places where you gotta, you know, there's an emotional toll and a label with people of color having to stand in those gaps and speak those spaces and speak those truths. And, you know, sometimes it's not going to be always as well received when it comes from people in the profession that are Black and brown and other people of color, but in your space and in your capacity, it can be. So thank you for your honesty, your transparency, and your willingness to engage in this work, because we can't do it alone. It's community work. And speaking of community, I think that's what we want to, and LaQuisha put it best, we are the community. And so as we bring more of us into the community and allow them to acknowledge that we are part of the community, there's a question here from, how can parent groups, going back to Montreal was talking about parents earlier, how can parent groups such as Moms for Social Justice help advocate for racial/social equality across our school system? This was a Facebook question that came in.
Mm-hmm. How can moms advocate
for social justice? It's an organization called Moms for Social Justice, mm-hmm. and they wanted to know how they can advocate for racial and social equity in the community, in the school system.
Go to those school board meetings. That's the number one thing. We all know right from wrong. We all know when something's not right. We all know when, like Jenny said, it may be good for my group, and it's definitely, but it's not good for their group, but we're comfortable with it. We all got to get uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. Parents, and not just Moms for Social Justice, parents in general, we have to get uncomfortable and go fight for somebody else's kid. Go fight for somebody else's school. Mm-hmm. Until we understand that Chattanooga is not one district, not one council, not one ward, or whatever you want to call it, and that we're one Chattanooga, we're going to be stuck in the same boat. People have to get their freaking heads out of the sand and start fighting for Chattanooga as a whole, or we're going to continue this sinking motion that we see right now, that people are just fighting for their districts. It doesn't work like that. Mm-hmm. One district can't live without the other. That's just like saying East Ridge or Red Bank can live without the city of Chattanooga. No, it doesn't work like that. You depend on the city of Chattanooga for something. So as a council, as a district, as a commission, we're going to have to start leaning on one another, and parents are going to have to stand up and start fighting for their schools and for what they believe in. And most of all, start voting in these elections, because that's where the change is made. Stop letting people fool you and tell you your vote doesn't count. I could care less about a national election. Local mm-hmm. voting It starts now.
Yep.
Early voting is until August 1st, and you have your chance to make a difference now. So that's my spiel on it. I mean, that's how you can get involved. Force people to fight, make them get their butts off their couch, get out of your own comfort zone, go fight for our kids because they are our future. I know that's so cliche, but our kids are our future. So if we don't fight for our future, then we're going to continue seeing the same old violence. We're going to continue to see the same old economic disparities and all of that. So parents, just get up and fight for your kids and fight for other folks' kids.
Thanks, Montreal. We appreciate you. And I think we would be remiss in the interest of time. We've already gone over a little bit, but I feel bad if we don't give the last word to Dayana. And I think that in the context of this conversation, you're going off to college. You're going to do amazing and great things in this world. When you come back to Chattanooga 10 years down the road, what do you want this school system and community to look like for your future children or for your siblings or family members that are coming up behind you? What advice would you give us adults that are still trying to tackle the problems that we created for you as you have traveled through this system? How do you want that to look when you return back to Hamilton County?
Yeah, so when I return back here, I really just wish to see like everything that you guys mentioned. You guys have said a lot of great things, and I really appreciate you guys for your time and allowing me to speak on your panel as well. But I just like to see literally more the students' voices mattering more, like student input actually, being considered whenever these decisions are made, as well as teachers, because honestly, teachers are our teachers, but a lot of times their words, like I said earlier, don't really carry much weight. But I'd really like to see a greater effort to actually just make sure that students aren't just you're not trying to just be diverse and have enough students of color. You want to make sure that these students of color aren't seen as a number. They're seen as people. They're seen as people with needs. And, we consider that every time, we make new rules or regulations or consider rezoning and stuff like that. I just really think that's really key, is just making sure that community input is valued over everything else, because like you guys said, these are our kids, these are our future. And I mentioned that a lot of things you said in my speech. And if we don't, this is our future, so we're going to be in the history textbook. So I just guess my advice to you guys is what I sort of said in my speech. What do you want to be remembered for? What do you want your family members to ask you about? When they ask you, what did you do during this time, they're going to ask what you did. And you're going to regret if you never did speak up, like you mentioned, or actually did something to help us progress towards something that is actually equal and everyone can agree on it.
Thank you so much. You are a beacon of light for all of us.
Thank you.
I don't know if I have anything to add beyond what Dayana has offered up, but I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. Thank you for holding space and committing to this. We had well over almost 60 people on here and another 100 on Facebook. I know this conversation was well reaching and far. It is recorded. We are going to upload this to our YouTube channel, and it's also on Facebook. So you can go back and review it, share it with folks who weren't able to join today, make sure that they get the opportunity to engage in this. But this is the first of many opportunities. I encourage you to connect with Aaron Glenn and Dr. Jennings, who are part of our leadership team in Chattanooga. We're in the process of programming and figuring out what do the next conversations and professional developments and offerings look like to support the community there. Use us, lean on us, and allow us to serve you. Thank you so much for your energy. We appreciate you. Love y'all. Have a great evening.